Created in 1923, the Anzac Soccer Ashes trophy contains the ashes of cigars smoked by Australian and New Zealand captains following one of the first international matches between the two sides. The ashes were contained in a razor blade case that less than a decade earlier had been carried by Private William Fisher at the landing of Gallipoli. That trophy went missing in the 1950s before it was discovered in pristine condition in the garage of a former chairman of the Australian Soccer Football Association in the last few years. So the trophy is back, and so is the rivalry between Australia and New Zealand, a two-test series to determine the next winner of the Soccer Ashes. Jacob and Christian, hello. It's a little bit of a rivalry that's perked its head up again in the last couple of years, Jacob, and it's really cool that now that both teams are qualified for the World Cup, we have this little opportunity to enter in the next phase of the clash.
Yeah, tons of history behind this game. And, you know, what helps as well is having now these two New Zealand clubs in the A-League. So we kind of get to experience a little bit of New Zealand football a bit more frequently, which is always good. And it just sort of shows that, you know, a lot of people, I suppose, have kind of looked down a little bit as on New Zealand as the little brother of Australia, especially in a footballing context. But, you know, in recent years, it's definitely shown that they've got quality in some of the players that they've produced. And, you know, obviously the two clubs that they've got there now playing in the A-League are doing a splendid job as well. So, you know, it's sort of, it's bringing a little bit of competitiveness to it as well. So it's, you know, we can't forget that, you know, New Zealand in 2010 were the only World Cup team to go undefeated in that tournament, with obviously 3 draws in the group stages and getting knocked out because they only had 3 points. But, you know, it's a feat that nobody else could quite match. And, you know, they've come a long way since then. So, no, it's going to be fascinating to watch. And I think it should be a really good test of, you know, obviously you two have spoken about the squad that was announced for Australia already, but, you know, a good test for some of those players and a chance to get some good minutes in for the Socceroos. It should be a cracker.
Absolutely. So we are here to give our little bit of opposition analysis on the New Zealand side that the Socceroos are going to be coming up against. In terms of their recent form, they qualified for the World Cup, as we say, through that automatic spot with the OFC. And since then, Christian, they've played friendlies against the Ivory Coast and Ukraine in June. That ended in 1-goal wins and losses, respectively. But in terms of the players, I think there's a big name that everyone's going to be well aware of that is doing quite well over in the Premier League at the moment. But who are your players to watch from this New Zealand side?
Yeah, now that you brought it up, I'll mention him straight off the bat. So Chris Wood, for those Premier League regular viewers, he's obviously playing his trade at Nottingham Forest. He's moved around a lot of clubs over his time in England, whether it be the Premier League or the Championship, and obviously a big, strong centre forward, loves to hold the ball up, and he's a real goal poacher, loves to finish his chances, very efficient as well. We saw that last season as well with Forest, a really key player for them. And it's just weird seeing a New Zealander doing so well in the Premier League. He's really flying the flag, which is great to see in Europe. So also captain of the national team, leadership qualities there, 44 goals in 84 caps. So he'll obviously be a real handful for whoever's tasked with, coming up against him, whether it be Chikati or someone else. It's going to be a real test, whoever's man-marking him. Other players, Finn Sermon, you remember, 21-year-old centre-back. We know, from his time with the Wellington Phoenix. I thought Chiefy really loved him, in the side. I think he's one of those defenders who really possesses that IQ, like positional awareness, all those sorts of things. For someone so young, you can tell he's really intelligent, and he earned that move to the Portland Timbers in the MLS where he's playing now, earning that experience.
He's captaining them, right? For a little bit?
I believe so, yeah. I'm not too sure if he's permanent, but I believe so, that he has captained a few matches. But yeah, he's definitely another one to keep an eye out for. He'll have his hands full as well with the likes of Aaron Kunda being called up, and Noah Botic, all these youngsters who are going to provide some real pace in that attacking third. So yeah, big test for him as well. For him, and I mentioned before, like he sort of helped guide Wellington Phoenix to that semi-final run a couple of years ago with Giancarlo Italiano. So, he's going to be a real integral part of this New Zealand side. And lastly, I've also picked out, I don't know if you remember, but Saprit Singh, he's been, he was obviously touted as, the next big thing in New Zealand football. He's 26 now. It's sort of hasn't gone the way he would have hoped or panned out. He obviously earned that big move to Bayern Munich a few years ago, playing the second team, and then earned a couple of caps for the Bayern Munich first team, coming off the bench, I think, in a couple of cameos. So sort of draws a few comparisons with Aaron Kunda having obviously signed for the same club in Bayern.
Yep.
Touted as classed as the next big thing for their respective nations, right? A lot of weight on their shoulders. If you watch him play, he's very, very good. Obviously, technically on the ball, quick feeds. He's a player who can really open things up, expand the match. Find little pockets of space in between the lines, and he's going to be crucial for them to create chances against this Socceroos side, who we know under Popovic is really well organised, well set up. He's going to have to be one of the keys for New Zealand if they want to unlock the Socceroos defence and try to find the back of the net. So he's another talent to really keep an eye on.
Jacob, I'm really interested tactically in how Chris Wood fits into this side, because obviously for him, he's coming from a Nottingham Forest side that is a very different team to what the New Zealand national team will be. So there's the very interesting question of, sure, you've got a really good goal poaching striker who can knock away the ball when he's presented those opportunities, but there's the difference in how those opportunities present themselves at Nottingham Forest compared to the New Zealand team.
Sure, and a part of that, of course, is just the level of quality of players around him at Forest. Obviously, they're all Premier League players with a ton of experience, and they can generate these really good chances for him where, it is going to be a little bit more difficult to come by for New Zealand. But I think kind of the snippets that we've seen in their games recently against the Ivory Coast and Ukraine kind of show a little bit of how they might go about things. Obviously, we know Chris Wood is quite a tall striker, kind of that target man player in a way at times as well. And so what New Zealand at least did in those two friendlies was play a lot of football out wide in those wide areas with the likes of, you mentioned Christian there, Sarpreet Singh, getting him on the ball and getting him to whip the ball in early to try and open up the defence a little bit earlier on in attacking phases of play. Now, Chris Wood didn't start in either of these games, so it was quite interesting to see them actually kind of persist with that, even though he wasn't on the pitch until much later on. So it kind of suggests that that's the way that they might look to go about it in attack for the most part. And building out from the back too is another key part to what they're doing. Again, Christian, you mentioned Finn Sermon there, and that's something that they're clearly looking to use, is his ability on the ball as well, to really create chances early on and kind of bypass a lot of the press that might come from Australia. So they've definitely got a dynamic attack, but it is very one-dimensional in that it is very much reliant on those wingers creating the space, finding the space, and putting the ball in the box for the forward. Otherwise, they don't get a lot of penetration through the middle. So that could really be the key to shutting them down, I suppose, from an Australian perspective, is making sure that those wingers are marked out of the game and that they can't have that impact.
Christian, talk to us about Darren Bazley, the New Zealand coach, a little bit about his story.
Yeah, so similar scenario compared to when Graham Arnold was in charge of the Socceroos, where he also managed the Olyroos at the Olympics, and Darren Bazley sort of has that same role. He's overseeing the under-23s and the Olympic sides, as well as obviously the national senior side. He's been involved with the New Zealand setup for a long time, dating back to 2011 when he started his managerial career for the New Zealand under-17s, then sort of worked his way up to the 20s with two separate stints, and then he's also been an assistant coach on two separate occasions for the senior side of New Zealand as well. So obviously very, very familiar with the environment and the surroundings there. And I think the key thing to take away from there is that because he's been so used to coaching these young sides and national youth setups, he isn't afraid to embed them in the senior side. I believe in their last friendly, I think it was against Ukraine, it was 5 players who were under 23 or younger. So that just goes to show the faith he's instilled in them. Yes, it's a friendly, but he loves to experiment and give those younger players an opportunity to showcase their talents and give them a chance to prove that they deserve to be in the first team. Because I think in years gone past, New Zealand have been a side who have, I guess, lent towards more of the experienced side, a lot of aging players. So I think for that moving forward, in terms of New Zealand's future, he's a coach who is looking more long-term rather than the short-term, whereas in comparison to Popovic, we know he loves to rely on the more experienced heads there. So I think there's a bit of a difference between those two coaches. In terms of formation, he loves to play the 4-2-3-1 system. We've seen that in the past few games recently, where he loves obviously the lone centre forward up top, which is usually Chris Wood, but that could change again with these two games depending on what he wants to experiment with. Loves to build out from the back, solid defensively. So all those kind of traits similar to Popovic as well, because those are the foundations that he loves, to keep it tight and compact in a defensive unit. Sometimes you see either Joe Bell or Marko Stemenic rotate between the number 6 and number 8 roles, which sort of reminds me a bit of Melbourne Victory when Jordi Valadon and Ryan Teague were there as a partnership, how it seems so seamless, right? The chemistry, whether one would push up, one would stay back to help protect the back four. I think that's what you're going to see as well from this New Zealand side, so expect that as well. I think for Beasley, he's going to look to this match to experience a bit more of the youth side of things, see what can come out of that. Interesting to see in terms of a tactical balance how he sort of approaches this game against the Socceroos, whether he sticks to the same formation or tries something different. So we'll wait and see.
Jacob, you concur with that tactical analysis?
Yeah, I think it's pretty spot on. The other thing as well is that you mentioned a 4-2-3-1. There are times as well where he drops the double pivot entirely and just plays a pretty bog standard 4-3-3, particularly defensively. I noticed the rest defense was quite heavily reliant on, like you said, those rotations in the midfield, but they like to set up quite solidly in a 4-3-3 a lot of the time. And I think that kind of is pretty standard nowadays in football. It gives you options in the press, but also to just set yourself a little bit and play in a bit of a lower or mid block. So it gives you that balance that you're talking about there, Christian. So no, I definitely think that it's going to be an interesting watch. Another manager who kind of reminds me a little bit of is Chiefy, in the way that they do look to play their football. It's all about kind of control, but also being able to control the game when you're not in possession. And that's, kind of obviously a philosophy that Chiefy's spoken about a lot, is that you don't have to control the game just by having the ball all the time. You can do it by the way that you set yourself when you're out of possession. So I found that quite interesting. I don't know, maybe that's just a thing that's within New Zealand football at the moment, and it just seems to be the trend. But no, they're definitely a well balanced side. It's just about, I think, that individual quality in certain areas of the park. Is that where the Socceroos are going to have the edge over them, or is that where New Zealand's going to have the edge over the Socceroos? And I think that's what's going to be able to turn the game perhaps a little bit in favour of one side or the other.
The adjective that I chose to throw into the title of this video is a thriving New Zealand, and I think it's an apt one at the moment, just because of the groundswell of what's happening for New Zealand football in general at the moment. Obviously, we have this OFC guaranteed place in the FIFA Men's World Cup as we've moved from 32 to 48 teams, and the Kiwis promptly snap that up. As we've said, we've seen Auckland FC come into the A-League and become A-League premiers in their very first season in the A-League men's, which has been massive. And then just in the last few days, we've seen the OFC confirm their 8 preferred teams for the new Pro League in Oceania that's going to launch in 2026. And both Auckland FC and Christchurch FC have been selected as to be part of that competition. And it just feels like, Christian, with kind of similar to Australia, a number of kind of New Zealand players going overseas as well and making their mark, and especially Chris Wood flying the flag. It feels like football in that country alongside with Australia is growing in a really nice way. And as much as this is a rivalry, as we touched on before, it does feel like we're on a very similar journey.
Yeah, it does feel like our paths are aligned for sure. It feels like a new generation blossoming for this New Zealand side. We know the struggles they've had in the past to qualify for past World Cups, and to have both Australia and New Zealand playing in the tournament in 2026 is huge. I think it's great, and obviously for New Zealand football, we know how important it is for countries to continually, consistently participate in these World Cups for youth development. That goes obviously for the Youth World Cups as well. So it seems as though New Zealand are trending towards the right path. It seems they're doing the right things behind the scenes as well. So definitely showing a lot of promise, and those players moving overseas, it just shows obviously they're doing something right. So hats off to them.
Christian brought up earlier the idea of using the old guard and getting through the experienced players, and then obviously the comparison, especially in an Australian sense, this squad is very young and we're not using A-League players. A lot of the older players are out of action for whatever reason. So there's a lot of youth and a lot of opportunity for young players to state their claim. Where I think there's a bit of a difference, Jacob, in New Zealand is the fact that it has been so long since they've qualified for a Men's World Cup.
Yeah.
How do you balance giving just reward to those servants that have dragged you along for so far and managed to qualify and build up New Zealand football for the past decade and get you to this World Cup, between doing what's best and maybe introducing some younger players and looking towards the future of New Zealand football?
Yeah, it's a tough nut to crack because, like you said, they wouldn't be here without the hard work of the players that have brought them to this point. But from just purely a competitive standpoint, you've got to look at who is going to give you the best chance. And, I think in New Zealand's case, a lot of it is going to be some of these younger players. I mean, that's no disrespect to players that have done their job and worked hard and, helped them through the qualifying phase and things like that. But it is those promising youngsters who, are going to, I think, be the ones that will provide a bigger advantage for New Zealand in these World Cup games. I mean, it's just it's difficult as well, because you don't also just want to feed the young kids to the wolves, right, and have it just fail spectacularly and look silly. So that's where I think actually the Socceroos have done a pretty decent job for the most part over the last pick however many years of kind of having a good balance and a good blend, and really just trying to make sure that it's not skewing too far into the the old guard, the golden generation, and then that goes away and what have you got. It's about finding that balance and making sure that it's something that can continue for a long time.
Yeah, it obviously there is a difference between this squad for the Soccer Ashes and the eventual World Cup squad. Yeah. You know who I think the other nation they should learn from is Wales. That's what it reminds me a lot of when they qualified for their first World Cup in a long time in Qatar 2022. Do you play Gareth Bales? Do you play your Aaron Ramseys? Those kind of names that have kind of got you to that point.
And I think it's good to have one or two of them around in the squad, right, as kind of those older heads and the mentors and those experienced veteran figures. But I think especially for smaller nations, you can't really just sideline some of these younger talents, because they're just the ones that when they're on the pitch are more likely to give you that spark and that burst that you might need to get a result.
It's going to be fascinating to see. All right, 2 games, one in Australia, one in New Zealand to settle the Soccer Ashes. Enjoy your football this week.